Shed, a place to gather, learn and exchange ideas. Thanks to everybody for joining today. We're going to be focusing on the US market. So a bit of background, with a population of 330 million, GDP of $20 trillion, plus nearly 20% of exports from the Southwest heading stateside, it's not surprising that so many of our SMEs want to sell in the US. And from a language and cultural perspective, surely it's one of the most straightforward markets. Today's Export Shed is a discussion with some US market experts designed to bust a few myths and answer some of the questions we hear most frequently from companies wanting a piece of the US action. In the shed today, I am pleased to introduce our resident shedders, Amita Virk, USA market specialist and Californian girl, Barbara Hollyhead, marketing expert extraordinaire with plenty of experience supporting food and drink companies in the US, and Nigel Barker, our own e-commerce and digital marketing guru. And I'm also delighted to welcome Tom Torelli, all the way from Chicago, who is a lawyer specializing in assisting European businesses with interest in the US. So we're going to run this as a panel format today. I'll be facilitating the discussion between our four panelists. And we're structuring the discussion around the journey that a company might make in entering, establishing, and then growing their sales in the US. Also dealing with setting up as an entity in the US as well. As Mark said, if you do have questions, please do put them in the chat. We'll answer them where we can, but as I say, as there's quite a lot of us and quite a lot to cover, we can't promise to answer every single question. So without further ado, I think we'll start with thinking about entering the market. And I think, first of all, a question for Amita, I think, to start off with. When we're thinking about preparing for US market entry, Amita, in terms of sort of strategy planning, can you give us an idea of what sort of things companies might need to consider?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carrie. I think first, before launching into that, it's good to just touch base on a few of the reasons why not to enter the States. Some of the things I've heard over the years are everyone speaks the same language, or there's a lot of people selling the same product that I do, so I can make some money too. Or I love visiting the States. So those are kind of the reasons maybe not to consider the US. But once you determine that those are not one of your reasons, and you have a viable product or service, and you think that you can get a bit of traction, I really like to break up the US into chunks. It's not one market, it's 50 markets. I'm sure all of you have heard of this many times before, but we can't emphasize it enough. And I like to work with clients to start in quite a tight region. So for example, if you have a luxury good, I don't know why luxury goods are on my mind right now, but if you have a luxury good and you're trying to get into some of the high-end retail stores, you need to do some research to find out where those customers are, if it is a brick and mortar store, for example. And let's just say it's in New York. I wouldn't then decide that you're going to try to sell to the entire East Coast. It's really best to tap away a little bit at New York. And I would even argue, break it down even smaller to Manhattan. So my point that I'm making is really get to know a tight region, quite small in area, before you start to go to the next spot. And it doesn't mean you have to spend a year there. You could do it a couple weeks or a quarter at a time. So that's the main point, is to really understand from a regional point of view where you're going to go. And one other consideration I would say is that you need to be well resourced. I typically tell clients, do you have about 30 to 40,000 pounds to throw away when you're considering the US market? And that sounds pretty grim. However, it costs money. You need support behind you. You need to get on the plane. You need to do your research. You need to attend trade shows, and you've got to have that money, because you don't know if you're going to get that back. So, those are, I would say, start with a tight regional focus, get to know it really, really well, have money behind you, and know that just because you have the most amazing, unique product here in the UK, there's probably 2,000 people that are doing the same thing in the States for cheaper, for faster, for better, and you've got to compete against those people.
Thanks, Amita. And I think one thing that we often I touched upon in the introduction really is the fact that we always think of the US as being culturally very similar to the UK, but I think possibly that assumption takes us into a few pitfalls, and I wondered whether you could just touch upon that for a minute.
Oh gosh, well, we don't find your jokes funny. No offense. And every time I tried to enter into the British humor, I was telling my colleagues that I was just introduced to I can't remember her name. What's the show?
Catherine Tate.
The Catherine Tate show. I had the pleasure of watching the other day, and I could not, apparently this is an old school show, so you guys think I'm, this is all very new, but I can't understand. I just don't get it. So I think that the humor needs to stay at home. It needs to stay off your marketing. It just doesn't translate. The other thing I will say is that things move very fast in the States. People are very direct. You need to get down to business. You need to close at the end of every conversation. You need to be very confident. We grow up from a young age being told that we can do whatever it is we want, and I think that really, it's so true across not just growing up, but across business. Business people think that they can do anything that they want to do and sell to whoever they want to sell to. And so I think that's really the mentality that you've got to have, which I think is quite challenging given the culture here. Yeah, so I think, I'm sure as we go through the panel, we'll discover some other cultural. Tom, I'm sure, has quite a few up his sleeve. But I'd say humor and being efficient and fast and to the point are probably the two most difficult ones for us as from here going over to the States.
Great, yeah, thanks, Amita. And yeah, I'd like to bring in Tom now, because I think what we hear often as well is, before you take a step into the States, you really need to get legal advice. And we hear this all the time. And Tom, just thinking about that, how important is it to get that legal advice in the early stages?
Keep talking, Carrie. I love this. Keep talking about how important those lawyers are. All right. Well, first of all, I want to echo what Amita had to say. The U.S. isn't for everybody. It takes time. That's, to me, as important as the money. You got to have some cash, and I think the 40,000 pounds is fine for starting up in the U.S., but not if you're going to have people on the ground. That, of course, is not even close to what would be required, closer to 150,000 pounds. But the key thing is you got to be very focused on who your market is. Who are you making a difference to? We all talk about niche products and niche markets and all that stuff, and everybody has that. I have that. Our firm, we work with small to medium-sized European companies doing business in the US. That has been our niche since I started the firm 36 years ago. But you've got to understand, how do you find those people? I also want to go take another step back and let those participants know that you're really lucky in the UK to have the Department of International Trade and Business West. I work with the French. I call them the French Foreign Legion, the Germans, the Swiss, the Dutch, the Belgians, and the Swedes, because I was born in Stockholm. And none of those countries have top quality marketing consultants on the ground in England. And that's what you've got. You've got an incredible luxury of high-performing people who have a lot of experience, that are dirt cheap or free, that are there at your disposal, have a passion for helping companies do business internationally. Use them, abuse them as much as you possibly can, because they're a resource that very few people anywhere else, certainly in Europe, have at their disposal. So you got to understand the American market, your American market. Who are the competitors? What are the pricing points for products? just because, as Amita said, you've been successful in the UK or Europe does not have anything to do with being successful in the US. So please take care of that. Another cultural issue before I get into the legal mumbo jumbo. For me, the big one is American enthusiasm. I'm enthusiastic, right? Well, that's because I'm American. It's almost by definition, we Americans are enthusiastic. And so when you meet somebody at a trade show or even on a webinar and you start talking with them, they're going to be super excited about you, about your products. Wow, let's do business together. You're considering doing business in the US? Great. I can see our name together in lights. That's an American approach. We're very excitable, optimistic, positive, enthusiastic. Yes, we could. And maybe we will be able to again, now that is going to leave. Yes. I don't want to make any political comments, of course. So be careful about American enthusiasm. And one of the mistakes that I've seen over the years, and again, I've been at this for a very long time, is Europeans may sign a contract with an American company, American partner, distributor, agent, or something like that, and then go, great. I can put America on the side and let my partner in the United States run the business. Or I've finally gotten my US dedicated website. Let's launch it and let it run. And I've got too much other stuff going on with China and Germany and Brexit and whatnot. So I'll sort of keep an eye a little bit on what's going on in the United States. Well, it ain't gonna work. It won't work. You've got to make America a priority. Sort of like go big or stay home. It's one or the other. Obviously, with COVID and visiting the United States, extremely difficult to do right now. We're still extremely busy helping UK companies prepare for when they're ready to come into the United States. So what's the big deal about lawyers in the United States? Well, we're almost half of the world's lawyers in the United States. So what's important, one thing that's important for you to keep in mind is whoever you're doing business with in the United States has a lawyer and talks to their lawyer a lot. They get advice from their lawyers. And since they talk to their lawyers a lot, they've become rather smart when it comes to protecting their legal interests. Well, who cares about the law? Well, I think all of you are getting wiser and wiser to the importance of the law in doing business, especially in doing business internationally. So in the US, the way we use lawyers is in a preventive capacity, which is different from the way lawyers are used almost anywhere else in the world. So a potential American partner of yours, you may not think that they will have spoken with their lawyer when they're starting to talk deal points with you, but in all likelihood, they have, and they know how to sort of not steer the negotiations, but they know key points for them, like exclusivity. Boy, man, exclusivity, that's got to be earned as far as I'm concerned. They've got to show you. I've got a distribution network that is nationwide, et cetera, et cetera. So boy, there are so many different areas that need to be looked at. But that's why Americans use lawyers early on when they do business. We also view legal assets as a way of valuing our business. We'll get into trademarks and other things, I think, a little bit later on. But if I can accumulate legal assets, like a deal with you that gives me exclusivity for 10 years, no minimum sales, blah, 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 I add value to my business. So, Carrie, that's a start.
Yeah, that's great, Tom. Thinking about, I guess, given that we do use lawyers in a very different way in the UK, as you've picked up on, where should it feels, I guess it feels unnatural for companies to then sort of say, well, I need to get a lawyer as a preventative, sort of stage. So I guess what are your sort of top tips on how a company first starts to use that lawyer? What are the questions that they should be asking in those early stages?
Well, since I'm a desperate man, as I'm sure you can already tell, not overly desperate, but I've been at this for 36 years, and I'm still in the startup phase of my business. It may sound ridiculous to you, but it is a great way to look at my business and my way forward. That this is not something like I can just sit back on my laurels and wait for people to come to me. So I'm happy to spend an hour with any of those people that are participating today for free on a Zoom or Teams call. Normally I'm at Lee Court 4 times a year and having these types of meetings. Now it's a little bit more convenient for everybody, actually in a strange sort of way, to have meetings via Zoom or Teams, to spend an hour with companies to talk about their products, their current activities, what they may already be doing in the United States, what their plans are, what their options are, what they're considering, what their concerns are already. For me, I have a shopping list of questions that I ask companies about when I'm in those 1 hour meetings. And we often start with intellectual property. Because most of our clients distinguish themselves from their competitors with technology or with something that distinguishes them. Because as Amita said, just because you have a product that is currently selling very well in the United States doesn't mean you're going to be successful. In fact, it probably means that you won't be successful because there are already competitors that have established themselves on the American market, and it's going to be very difficult for you to take market share. So technology is often the case. Trademarks is the very first subject that I take up with clients. And you'll be surprised, of the participants today, I bet half of them or more have never registered a trademark anywhere. And half of those have not thought about registering their marks in the United States. To me, the cheapest way to increase the value of your business is through trademark registration. It is by far the cheapest way because you're announcing to the world, I believe in myself. I believe in the value of my reputation because it's your reputation that your trademark carries. So trademarks and intellectual property, how do we ring fence our technology, et cetera, copyrights, patents, those types of things. And then the whole issue of contracts with partners, with agents, distributors, licensees, et cetera.
Yeah, I think, okay. I think we're going to come on to the contracts. Okay. Yeah, the contract side of things. But yeah, so I think, I mean, thank you for that offer, Tom. That sounds absolutely brilliant for people to be able to tap into an hour of your time and maybe to go through some of those initial considerations. I think that sounds absolutely really worthwhile. I'd like to bring in Barbara at this stage. So thinking again about that early market entry stage, Barbara, what are the sort of marketing considerations at this stage for a company? Because I think as we've heard from Amita, you know, you need a certain amount of investment. I think some of that clearly is going to go towards your marketing. So can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Kerry. I think at this stage, I'm going to touch on some of the things that Tom and Amita have said already, actually, because for me, I know a lot of people think that marketing is marketing communications, but it's more fundamental than that and needs to be, it's about the strategic planning and the whys and the whats at the beginning, really. So I would start with, I think it's actually doing some market research, which sounds a bit scary and it sounds a bit expensive, but you can actually, and you can always talk to Kerry about market research, but you can do quite a lot yourself, but you can also
I didn't tell Barbara to say that, by the way.
I'm a big believer in it. But you've got to start with the knowledge. What do you get to know the market? What do you know about it? You can assume a lot of things, but they may or may not be correct. And I think, as Amita was talking about earlier, you've got 50 different states. You've got lots of different types of, or the demographics vary so much from state to state. So you're going to have to sort of get your ducks in a row and invest the time and perhaps some money in actually gleaning as much knowledge as you can get before you start landing out there. Is there even a demand for your product or service? And I think, as Tom was saying, if there's somebody out there already, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's space for you as well. But you need to have a look at that and make some assumptions and calculations. How much is it going to cost you to get into that market with the shipping, the regulations? You know, if you're food and drink or you're pharmaceutical, you'd be looking at FDA registration, for example, and there's a cost associated with that. The setting of a business, the legal, the financial, this all kind of, to me, always comes under marketing, because it's just a framework, really. Because once you know what your costs are likely to be, you need to also be looking at what your selling price might be. And I have spoken with a few companies in the recent past who try and set their selling price based on what their costs are. But actually, you've got to see, will your audience pay that price? You're going to have to do some calculations as to what your costs are and what price is actually achievable. And then whether it's even going to be profitable for you to enter the market. But then, of course, price achievable, who's going to pay what price? Who are they? Who's your ideal client? You need to do some nutting out on who your client actually might be, and whether you're talking about actually a consumer or a user of your product, or whether you're talking about selling to a business. And then there's all the other aspects, like your routes to market, how you're going to reach your chosen ideal customers. And then you start to get down to the communication side of things, which may be digital, but depending on your product or your service, there may be other touch points and other ways of communicating with them. There's the other infrastructural side of things, which again sort of come under a marketing umbrella, because it's about how you're perceived as well. How will you represent your product or service in the market to your chosen audience? And is it believable? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What is their experience like? And then how are you going to resource it? Yeah. And then I think, to Amita's point earlier, it's about, you can't actually do everything everywhere. You're going to have to, once you've sort of started to build a picture of who your audience are, where they are, whether they've got an interest in your product or service, how you're going to solve their problems. You've got to try and define where they are and where you're going to put your resources to start with, because you can't do everything first off. I'll breathe now.
Great, thank you, Barbara. Yeah, I mean, it just shows you how much there is to consider, you know, and that's just sort of thinking about marketing, you know, as a whole, and your strategy. I think one thing that we get asked quite often is, why can't we just start in the US market via e-commerce? And I think really question for Nigel, you know, why can't companies just sort of get on and sell via e-commerce, test the market that way? You know, what are your thoughts on that, Nigel?
Yeah, it's a very good way of testing the market is through you know, using e-commerce platforms and e-marketplaces, but that doesn't make it necessarily the most simplistic approach either. You know, as the activity has increased and we're seeing more people spending online, shopping online, especially over COVID, that in many ways has made the business of actually cutting through in these digital platforms, you know, slightly more challenging. So I think e-commerce is always a good starting basis, a starting point, but it's not something that you can just sort of stroll up and sort of put a couple of posts up and you know, list your products and then walk away and count the cash all the way to the bank. So it does require more planning and more strategy than you would think. Even just running, and I've got there's a couple of people on the call I know that are really experienced Amazon sellers, and you know, taking that step of moving just to Amazon in the States is, whilst compared with setting up a shop or possibly even selling through you know, dealers out in the States, can be a more flexible solution. It's not something you just walk into. Exactly what Tom said, actually, one of the first things you need to think about is, am I protected? Have I got my trademarks sorted out? Am I just going to be basically giving my intellectual property away for free to everybody? because I'm not protected. So the first thing that before you even go into the e-commerce market, you're into conversations with lawyers about how do I protect myself. That can take time. That's not an overnight thing, and failure to do that leads you open to all sorts of potential abuses. And I'm not going to share them, but I've got a couple of scare stories, that are businesses that haven't done that, and they've struggled. They've run into significant problems. So that's point one. The other thing is actually, do you have even the budget right now to market yourself successfully on a digital platform in the States? Because that doesn't come for free, and the reliance on pay-per-click when you're launching into any new market, whether that be pay-per-click on Google or Bing, whether that be pay-per-click on Amazon, Amazon Marketing Services, or even eBay with these sponsored shops and listings on eBay, whether that be through social media, trying to build brand awareness, that is going to cost you money to get that reach in order to actually have some kind of physical presence. If you just pop some stuff on a web store somewhere, and expect it to sell in 5 years' time, you can expect to see exactly the same stuff sitting there. You've got to have the sort of the plan and the money to back that plan up. And I think a lot of businesses do fail, and I do get this a lot. We've tried the States and it didn't work. When you ask what they did, they ran a Facebook campaign for a couple of weeks, got a couple of clicks, didn't really make any sales, instantly thought, that's not working. But you're launching yourself into a market where you don't exist. So effectively, it's like you're starting from scratch. You are effectively, launching. It's the same as when you launch any new brand, because they don't know you exist. Okay, so having that budget is and also the plan and the strategy for spending it wisely.
Is there also the actual sort of fulfillment of those orders? So when you do actually get any orders, there's the fulfillment of them as well, which I wonder whether that's something, we get asked about that a lot. How do I go about fulfilling those orders? It's, not always easy just to be sending things directly from the
Amazon, which has got 49% of the market, completely fundamentally changed the game. And next day, same day delivery is very commonplace. COVID has sort of stretched that to a couple of days in a lot of places, but that's going to go back to being, next and same day in certain areas. If you're not able to deliver that level of service in the States, then you are going to struggle. Amazon Prime itself is Amazon's biggest product, and Prime users in the States, they like their Prime, they pay for their Prime, and they're going to use their Prime. So actually, Amazon, there's swings and roundabouts to that as a platform, but actually, if you can get yourself accepted onto the Amazon.com platform, using their fulfillment model isn't a bad starting point. It's not the cheapest. I know Amazon sellers on here will tell me, it's not the cheapest, but actually from a kind of solution that you can do just by yourself, sitting behind your laptop, providing you got the stock you can get them once you've gone through all the other processes, it's not a bad starting point. Because actually fulfilling from within the States is pretty much essential, unless you're in such a niche area. Let's say you were selling vintage guitars. All right, just because I've got them behind me, it's the first thing that came to mind. If you're selling vintage guitars, if I was going to buy a vintage Gibson 335, I don't know, I would wait a couple of weeks for that. Of course I would. This is a different sort of purchase. This is a very emotional purchase. There's probably only 5 of those particular models that I want in existence. I'm going to wait. But if I'm selling toothpaste, that's the other end of the market. I ain't going to wait 2 weeks for my tube of toothpaste. And I don't care if it's the most organically lovely charcoal-filled toothpaste on planet Earth made by pixies in the Devon countryside. I'm not going to wait 2 weeks for that toothpaste to come. I'm just going to go to Walmart and buy it. So you've got to think, what am I selling? What are my realistic lead times in terms of delivery? And for the vast majority of businesses, fulfilling within the States, from within the States, is essential. And the closer you can fulfill to your purchaser, the customer, the better, because the States is a big country. It takes a long time to get from one side to the other side, which again is why Amazon's fulfillment model is pretty good, because they've got a fairly impressive infrastructure out there that will sort that bit out for you. So, but thinking very carefully about it is really, really important. Having that in place is really important.
Great, thank you, Nigel. We're going to move on to thinking about finding a local partner, whether that's a distributor or an agent, somebody that you might work with locally to help you with your business in the States, to help you with your sales and so on. Before we move on, I wonder whether we've put everyone off asking questions by saying that we might not get around to answering all of them, because I haven't actually seen any questions as yet. So just an opportunity for anybody at this stage, if you've got any burning questions, do speak up or put something in the chat. Does anybody have anything? Tom, you look like you would like to ask a question.
Who, me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I'd like to say something to echo Nigel's comments about e-commerce. The Brits are by far the best in Europe by a long shot at e-commerce. And there are groups of companies that band together to address e-commerce issues in the United States. And I think Nigel is a very busy man with e-commerce related companies. There are 3 legal issues that everybody should take a look at, actually more than that. But number 1, already discussed, trademark. Please register your trademarks in the United States. Probably do a full trademark search. I'd be happy to talk about the reasons why doing a full trademark search makes sense. The second thing is sales terms. You may say, oh, I'm in England and I'm selling over the internet. I'm going to sell according to my UK sales terms and conditions. Well, you know, your consumers in the United States, they may buy subject to your sales terms, but if anything bad happens, you're going to end up in court in the United States, not in the UK, even if your sales terms call for disputes to be resolved in the UK. So, you know, get your head out of the sand. Excuse me for being so frank. It's important that you have sales terms that are enforceable in the United States. And the next thing is your warranty or guarantee. First of all, nobody in the United States uses the word guarantee, unless you mean I'm going to give you your money back if you're unhappy at any time. And most sellers are not keen on having a money back guarantee, but the word guarantee infers that it's a full lifetime guarantee. So everybody in the United States that is a wise seller sells with a limited warranty. The word limited then means, oh, I better take a close look at what the limitations are of this warranty. And if you're selling a consumer product, you absolutely must use certain what we call magic language, whereby you disclaim the implied warranties of merchantability and fitness for a particular purpose, and you disclaim this, that, and whatnot. It's fancy Dan language. If you've ever bought an American consumer product, you'll see it on the packaging and in the limited warranty that we're disclaiming lots of things, because of course we all know that limited warranties are designed to protect the seller and not protect the consumer. But you've got to have those 3 things adapted to the US market. Again, if you're looking at an opportunity, you're opportunistic about the US market, first of all, I think that's a mistake. Better to not do business in the US than to just try to seize one opportunity or two. You need to be organized and have a long-term vision for doing business in the US. But if you do have a long-term vision, then these are 3 things: trademark, sales terms, and a limited warranty.
Great, thank you, Tom. That's really useful. And actually, I had a question from Chris Wood, which is for you, Tom, about visas. And I wonder whether this is something that sort of more broadly actually to touch upon, because obviously in the early stages of doing business in the US, you might want to go and visit a trade show, or you might be a service company that does want to go and work for a week or so for a US company. And I think this is specifically about visas to work for a US company for a week. Is that something that you could tell us about, Tom?
Chris, go away. Don't ask those kinds of difficult questions, please. You know it's a difficult question. Why are you asking it online? You're putting me on the spot. Here's the deal. Already working for an American company or a city administration without a proper work visa is unauthorized. And we have some gaping holes in the American immigration laws. And I think that might be why you're asking this question, because it's a very confusing area. One of our lawyers devotes 100% of her time to immigration work. And she might be actually better than I am to answer this particular question. But here's my advice, and hopefully nobody else is listening in. So everybody else, tune out for just a moment. Chris, you have to be realistic about this. First of all, January of next year, that is literally tomorrow, if you will. So the only way you today, in the days of COVID, could get into the United States is through the national interest exception. And the national interest exception is a new animal that came up this summer because we closed our borders for whatever it was, 3, 4, 5 months. Now that we're slowly reopening our border, the only people that can get in are people who have green cards, permanent residents, American citizens, even people on E2 visas, L1 visas. They cannot get back into the United States unless either they go to the Caribbean, to a country from which you can enter the United States today, and that most of the Caribbean has that possibility, but then you've got to quarantine there for 2 weeks. The Caribbean's maybe not the worst place. And then you can come in, waltz into the United States on an ESTA or on a B1, B2, or whatever other visa you may have. If you want to come straight into the United States, you've got to qualify under the national interest exception. And the national interest exception is tied to what's crucial for the economic recovery in the United States, or the food supply, obviously medical interest. If you have anything to do with COVID related issues, you're welcome. Transportation, the food supply, these types of things. Now, if you've got a good immigration lawyer that can provide you with some good guidance, we have been very successful so far in Europe. In China, it's been difficult, but in Europe, we've been successful on the 7 or 8 different NIE cases that we have handled for clients. But you've got to weave a wonderful story to the consulate about the urgency of the need for you to be in the United States, and tie it to one of these crucial areas that are the safety, security, food supply, medical industry, those types of things. I'd be happy to have an offline conversation with you about that. We do charge, of course, for doing the national interest exception, like any other visa. But where there's a will, there's a way, normally, when it comes to immigration. But it's no game, it's no child's play anymore. Believe me, everybody, it's not a bureaucratic step to get a visa to the United States anymore. It's a real challenge.
Yeah, Tom, I've just unmuted myself. I hope that's okay, Amita. We have got the DIT really helping and pulling out all the stops on this. We've got the consulate writing letters. We've got I think even we've got one of the DIT guys knows, used to work with somebody who used to work with Al Gore, who's hopefully going to be asked to write a letter. So we're doing all of that, but I've then got to go for this exemption, and because it's an aviation job, there may well be a workaround with that. But it's still, yeah, like you said, it's it's like playing a game of pinball with different departments. It's like going to France in the 1970s. It's abysmal. It's awful.
Well, that's why my name is Tommy. Pinball wizard, right?
Yeah, there you go. Look at that.
Absolutely. Sure. But let's have an offline conversation so we can continue on with the webinar. But sure, it sounds promising. Sounds very promising, Chris.
Cheers.
Okay, I've got a question as well coming through from Lee about selling alcohol via e-commerce, and advising that you need to set up a legal entity in that case. Is that to initially import the product? I know we're going to touch upon setting up in the States a bit later, but is that something that you maybe could answer now, Tom?
No, because this is a very complicated subject and very unique to the alcohol business. Alcohol is, of course, heavily regulated in the U.S. You need to have an importer. You're perhaps familiar with the three-tier system of distribution of alcohol in the United States. You would, if you were to be interested in selling alcohol via e-commerce in the U.S., I think you'd need to either get your own importer's license or have an importer bring the products into the United States. Happy to have a conversation with you. We have not yet been confronted with alcohol sales over e-commerce, although since I lived in France for 9 years and developed a relationship with the Chamber of Commerce in Cognac, we do work with a number of wine producers, cognac and other alcohols. So happy to have a conversation on that. But that's a very complicated area and one that you don't want to mess up right off the bat. Also, there's a question about whether trademarks need to be protected state by state, and the answer to that is no. And there are very rare occasions when it's a good idea to register in a specific state. Normally, all you need to do is to register with the federal government, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. But to close out that subject, as of August of 2019, you companies cannot register your own trademarks in the United States. You must go through an American law firm. That's because there were so many trademark squatters that were trying to seek trademark registration from the Far East that had no idea how to register a mark, and the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office got fed up with spending so much time with those folks that they decided, nope, from now on out, you have to deal through an American lawyer.
Okay, Nigel, you've got a question.
It's actually an observation. I'm going to echo what Tom said. My understanding, and I said Tom's right, it is a deeply complex area. But my understanding on alcohol sales into the States is that you do need to be the importer, which means you need an importer's license for it, or work with the distributor. But the other flip side of that is quite a lot of US e-commerce sites and just US facing sites also get utilized by Canadians, and that would be a separate entity. You would then need to also be able to effectively import that product into Canada as well. So it is something that you need to kind of spend a bit of time on, I would say.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm waiting for the answer to any of these questions to be, oh yes, it's simple. I suspect that's not going to happen. Anyway, we want to move on to thinking about a local partner. So whether you're going to need an importer, distributor, agent, somebody on the ground who's going to help you sell your products or services in the States. And obviously, depending on sector, many companies are going to need this kind of local partner. Amita, how would you sort of start to go about finding the ideal local partner?
Yeah, I mean, it does definitely depend on sectors, but let's assume, because I'm looking at the list today, that you are looking for a distributor for your products. You go through the normal routes of referrals and that kind of thing. Let's just say that that's not quite working. What I'll do is back up as to a few stories I've heard. There are a lot of distributors out there that will claim that they can help you across the whole country. And I have yet to find someone who can actually do that, and when I have, it's been a very niche area. So that's number one. It's highly unlikely. There are also distributors that will say, oh, I used to be a buyer here or a buyer there. If you give me 10 grand a month holding fee, I'll keep you going. I'll get you into this. I'll get you, again, that you need to tread carefully with as well. So, you need a network of distributors, and you need a network of distributors. You need a credible distributor. You need all the references. You need all the due diligence. Then you need to talk to Tom about your contract with that distributor, but we'll get into that as well. But so let's assume now you found a distributor. And I think that's where a lot of things can go wrong. Some of the things I've seen is where, and again, it goes back to your strategy. So let's say that you you want to sell as much as you can, but you do care about your brand credibility, because that's very different than just selling as many units as you want as you can, and it doesn't matter. You don't care about the brand, you release it to the distributor. But if you do care about your brand, which I think most people do, then you really need to back up before you appoint that distributor and know what that product journey is and how it's going to reach the consumer. And I think that's one area that I see a lot of companies don't always have at the forefront of their mind. They're more concentrating on selling as much as they can to the distributor, which is important. But it's more important to know where you want that product to end up. I think you also need to keep a distributor on a very tight leash, and that's no disrespect. A distributor's not a dog, but you do need to keep them on a tight leash, meaning that you need some checks and balances. So what are the targets every 3 months, every 6 months? What do you expect from that distributor? And also you need to be prepared to invest in marketing with that distributor. So really the bottom line is it is a partnership with your distributor. However, you kind of want that to lean more in your favor. So you need sales targets. You need to know what you expect from the distributors, and what areas that they're going to reach. I mean, it's quite a complicated, we don't want to say the US is complicated, but it's quite a complicated relationship. The last thing I'll say is it's not that you will only have a distributor. You might have a combination. Like in California, you might have some agents. In New York, you might have a distributor. So you can mix around the way that your product is reaching its ultimate destination. But it goes down to you need more than one. You need a really good, sound contract with a U.S. attorney. Your British attorney might know a little bit about the U.S., but you really do need someone who's well-versed in U.S. law. I can't emphasize that enough. And you also need to have targets and milestones that you're working on together. And you need to get on a plane. It's easier to do things from the UK with the US than it is, let's just say, with India. So you don't need to go as frequently, but you do need to go, and you need to be present and with your partners. And I'll hand it over to someone else.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. That's great. I think you touched upon this, and I think we've had a question about this. So yeah, from a legal perspective, then how do companies go about drawing up those contracts with their US partners?
Well, the most important thing, and thank you, Roger, for asking that question. That is the most important thing in contract negotiations in the US is seizing control of the negotiations by taking responsibility to prepare the first draft of the contract. Now you might say, yeah, sure, Tom, you're just trying to get more business that way. And of course, I'm here to get some business. There's no question about that, but I'm also trying to give you as much valuable information as I can that you can use whether you use us or use somebody else. I mean, there are only 900,000 other lawyers in the United States. Think about it, 900,000 lawyers. One lawyer for what, every 300 people, something like that, 300-400 people? So that's door number one, seize control by preparing the first draft of the contract. Contracts in the United States, distribution agreements, they're 15, 20, 25 pages long, because in the US, everything is left to the parties to negotiate. What you don't negotiate hasn't been treated. It's not treated in any regulations or codes or laws. So it's up to you to negotiate those. Boy, do I agree with Amita on everything that she says. She's a great resource, by the way. Rely on Amita for hands-on, and Barbara for that matter as well, for people that are going to say it like it is. They're not going to puff it up or otherwise. And if you do take advantage of that hour with me, I'm going to be tough too about what you're up to and what your commitment is to the U.S. market, et cetera. To me, what a good contract with a partner in the US is going to include is control and flexibility. Control means to me information. And that's something Amita touched on. You got to have reporting. You got to have reporting all the time. You know, she said, get on a plane. Boy, do I agree with that. If you don't have the time to manage the American business, then don't do it. Don't do it. You can really make major mistakes that can damage your business back in the UK. You know, back to the e-commerce business. You know, you say, oh, this is great. We're selling in the US via e-commerce. People are visiting our UK website. Yeah, you're now shipping products to the United States, okay? And you don't know what's happening. You don't know how people are using those products. Then maybe they're misapplying the products. Maybe you're going to get sued for product liability or something like that. I mean, the US market is a very serious, we're a very litigious society here in the US. Go big or stay home. You know, this business of, yeah, we're starting to sell and we're excited and yeah, but we don't know what we're doing. Well, it's important that you know what you're doing. So seize control by preparing the first draft of the contract. Control means information. Flexibility means you can get out. You can get out of the contract. Anybody who insists on a 5-year contract, tell them, no, that's just not, it's not in the cards. 5-year contracts for distributors, maybe for a licensee who's got to buy equipment and all that kind of stuff, maybe, but then there got to be minimum sales quantities. And I'm going to give you a trade secret here, even though I really don't want to, but minimum sales quantities is a fabulous way to get out of an unproductive relationship. And when I say minimum sales, I mean minimum sales, not purchase objectives. Oh yeah, well, you didn't meet the purchase objectives. Well, who cares about that? There was an objective. It's not a minimum sales requirement. Minimum sales requirements, the magic language for that, yeah, I'm going to say it, is the distributor agrees to purchase, pay for, and sell to independent third-party purchasers this amount. And if they don't, then you can terminate the agreement. And here's another nice freebie. Well, I'm getting tired of freebies. But another nice freebie, I think, is that we can convert the exclusive to non-exclusive. No, we can terminate the agreement. Why? Well, because if you've granted your first distributor exclusivity, let's say for a year or two, and things haven't panned out very well, and all you can do is to convert exclusive to non-exclusive, how many other distributors do you think you're going to get interested in selling your products? I think it's going to be somewhere around that many, as in 0. Why? Well, because the distributor that had the exclusive for 2 years has had a 2-year advance on any new distributors and have already, done some marketing efforts, et cetera, and have established themselves on the market, which would discourage any other distributor from entering the market as well. You need to have the right to get out of an unproductive relationship. And just like in football, that's your football, not ours, but it also applies to our football here in the United States. Sometimes the best deals are the ones you don't make. And so there's got to be a point where you say, we're not going to do that. And so you need to have alternatives. One last thing on the exclusivity issue. Amita talked about starting in Manhattan and then branching out to the Bronx and Brooklyn and growing your business that way. Sure. But in the US, although we're the country that started the anti-competition or the competition laws 120 years ago, we don't enforce them so much these days. You can carve up the US market according to regions and even according to specific markets and customer types. You don't sell to General Electric. Sorry, we're selling to General Electric, or we have another distributor that is selling to General Electric. You can restrict your partners a lot more currently in the United States than you can in Europe. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. That's, yeah. And I think, I was going to ask you sort of further about exclusivity, but that's really great. I think just to change tack a tiny bit on the distributors, Barbara, will your local partner, say for argument's sake, this distributor, will they play a part in doing your marketing locally? Could you expect that, and how might that work?
Yes, I would, but they've got to know what they're supposed to do. And I've come across so many in the past where the distributor is just left to do the whole job. Referencing what Tom was saying just now, you can't just sign up with a distributor and walk away and off they go to do the job. You have to make very, very clear what your expectations are. And Tom will confirm, but build it into the contract, be very, very specific. And what do you want them to do with your brand? How are they supposed to represent your brand? Where can they put it? Where can they not put it? Should it be taped to should your point of sale that's supporting the brand, say if it's a food product, for example, should it all be sellotaped up on the end of the gondola, or should it be presented in another way? You need to be very clear, and actually it's important to give them, make it easy for them, basically, by giving them as much support as you can. Maybe something I've done in the past is set up a brand manual or an operations manual, which lays out exactly how your brand product or service should be represented. Maybe set up a distributor portal for them. Just give them the information that they need and keep it updated on a regular basis and nurture that relationship, is what I would say. In fact, I wanted to ask Tom a question, building on what he was saying, and about distributors, is whether whether a distributor could possibly say, well, if you want to end a contract with a distributor, they might say, well, actually, you never gave me any support, so how was I supposed to have actually delivered on those targets? So I'd be interested to know what Tom thinks about that from a contract point of view, and whether it's worth putting that kind of detail in.
I have another event that I've got to break off to here in a minute, but what we want to do is we want to build in language in the contract that minimizes the obligations on you as the producer and supplier in the UK concerning the support. So often these terms are very open-ended. You know, supplier shall provide all necessary support for to help distributor achieve its goals and stuff like that. Well, all of a sudden, if you terminate the agreement, they're going to come back and say, hey, you didn't provide us with the support. So boy, do you want to avoid conflicts in the United States. We're involved in several pieces of litigation right now, and our clients are bleeding money on us. I mean, we're delighted to manage the litigation. It's great business for lawyers. It's miserable for clients. So the idea is to take preventive steps. And if for example, we charge $3,000 to prepare a draft of a distribution agreement, we would send you a list of around 20 questions. You'd respond, we'd prepare the draft, we'd send it to you, we'd go through it with you, and we'd make one round of changes with you so that you're in a position to send it to your American partner for $3,000. And those of you that are listening in that think that that $3,000 is too much, well, that's way too much money, then skip the US market for the time being, because you're not ready to do business in the United States. $3,000 is a drop in the bucket. And if we can't add one heck of a lot more value to your business than the $3,000 you would spend on that draft contract, we shouldn't be on this I shouldn't be on this webinar. And that's why I think we can really be of some assistance to you, but you've got to suck it up and take charge of the negotiations and limit your engagement with your partner in the United States. But you're absolutely right, Barbara. It can be a thorny issue when it comes to termination. And that's why the language in the contract needs to be crystal clear and needs to be relatively short term, so that, okay, the agreement ends on December 31st, 2021. You don't have any need to do anything other than wait until then, and then the party's over, or if they don't achieve those minimum sales, etc. Okay, I've got to go. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Tom, for your contribution. Yeah, very much valued. I think we've got, if people are happy to stay on just for a short time longer, but just we wanted to cover a couple of things about setting up in the States, because obviously that might be the next natural step. And I wonder, Amita, if maybe you could step in here and just talk about maybe when would a company maybe consider that might be the next decision and the next step for them?
Yeah, I mean, we've lost our lawyer who was giving free advice. So, gosh, what we do. But from a sort of non-legal standpoint, well, and a little bit of legal, I think there's lots of reasons to set up, and I think it goes back to strategy. So, the legal side would be, you take the liability away a little bit from your UK company. So that's one reason to have a separate entity. Another reason is to really give the impression that you are quite serious and long-term. And by the way, it doesn't cost that much at all to set up an entity in the States. It's like $3,000. It's really not that complicated, but it's not something that you go in with, before you've sold anything. So I think that's the point. I think I talk to a lot of companies that get really excited about the States and they've sold a little bit and they're like, okay, should I set up a company? And I think, you have to go back to what your product is. If you have a product that might invite some lawsuits or liability or product liability, then it might be a good idea to think about protecting your UK interests. If there's a lot of money going back and forth, another reason to set up a UK company from a tax perspective. From a customer impression perspective, it can be a good idea as well. So, it's not something to rush into, but I think it's not that expensive. It's, you do need to have representation in the States in order to do so, but it has more advantages than not in terms of setting up.
Thanks, Amita. And I think something else that I just wanted to ask as well is thinking about your US website. Nigel, maybe you can come in here. In terms of establishing your domain, does your local US partner have any input into that website and the running of that? How does that work?
So I'm quite clear about this, that if this is your brand, and your intellectual property, you want to retain as much structural control over that as you possibly can. Okay, that doesn't mean to say that you don't have people that help you with it. So localizing to the US market is just as important as localizing to any other market. And I talk about localization, not translation, because if I would say translation, you would say, well, they speak English, so the website's going to be English. But actually, we know that there are a significant number of words, anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000 words, and it always changes depending on which article you read, that are different between the US and the UK. In terms of phrase, the word pants means something completely different in the States. We all know that. So, understanding that's really, really important, and actually working with your distributor or your partner out in the States to actually help you with the content is fine. But actually, a few businesses have said, oh, our distributors set up our US website for us. They've bought the domain and they've set up the US website. You've effectively handed them the domain on a plate. You can't trademark a website address. It's one of the things you can't trademark. So you can't say, well, they've infringed upon our copyright, because they haven't. Anyway, I could buy any website address that I choose to, providing I can actually get access to it. So that is first and foremost. The other thing that the mistake people make is understanding what domains they actually should be using out in the States. And in my line of work, that your best friend is the .com. The generic top level domain, good old fashioned .com. As the web has evolved, it's become much more local. So country specific top level domains like your .co.uk are perceived by search engines, to be servicing that particular market, quite rightly so. So actually, to enable you to get any traction within the States, first and foremost, you need to be as visible and as in the hierarchy as you possibly can. So your .com being a generic top level domain, but also being the country specific top level domain for the States, puts you in a really, really strong point. So anyone that hasn't got the domain, the .com domain, and they want to do business in the States, I suggest you go out and get it. If you can't get it, because guess what, it's already gone, you then have to sit there and say, okay, is that because my brand name has already gone in the States? So can I actually register my brand in the States? Am I going to be infringing on someone else's property? So that's another point of concern. The other thing is, why didn't you get the .com when you bought the .co.uk? Because it was another £6.99. If you're quibbling over £6.99, you shouldn't be in business. You know, if you can't afford £6.99, £11.98 for 2 years, you know, then just why people don't buy these domains at the time, I do not know. And the reason is I couldn't get hold of it. When I worked in a branding agency, one of the key things that we said when we were, you know, rebranding or branding businesses is, what can we get as the URL? What website address can we get? And we discounted several because we couldn't get a meaningful URL around that brand. Because your URL is no longer just some little kind of thing that we've got a website, how nice. It's a key part of your brand. So actually, .com with your brand representation, or maybe your brand is something different in the States. Maybe you have to, you might find you can't use your brand in the States because it's already gone. So somebody already owns that particular brand name, and you might get told, you know, cut it. So maybe you actually trade as a separate thing. And we all know the you know, marathon versus Snickers. Everyone, that's the classic one that everyone will talk about. Although everyone came in line with Snickers, but I still call them marathons because I'm very, very old. Although shopkeepers won't sell them to you. But yeah, you know, there's plenty of examples of businesses that have had a different brand name in one territory to another territory. That's not a new thing. So maybe you have to do that in the States. But in terms of website itself, your .com is your best friend. So if you've got that, that's a massive tick in the box, because once you've got it, they can't take it away from you unless you're leasing it. The other thing to think about is how you're then going to differentiate your site from your UK site to your US version of your site, because potentially you could have very similar content across both pages. Which one does Google serve? So you need to make sure you've got the structural sort of data in the code, which all comes down to one line of code replicated several hundred times, depending on the size of the website, which is called hreflang, which is the bit of code that Google then says, oh, hang on a second, okay, you've got a US site, you've got a UK site, you've got a French site, and it puts you in the right pigeonhole. So it knows what to serve, because Google wants to serve local content. So it wants to find something in its US drawer, if you like, think of it as a filing cabinet, for your particular product or service. And if it thinks you're in the UK drawer, it ain't going to serve you, or it might serve you down on page 42, which is effectively not serving you.
Do you know, I feel like I'm learning an awful lot from this this discussion, which is fantastic. I hope everybody else feels the same, but it's kind of mind-blowing as well that there is so much to consider on what we often perceive to be quite a straightforward market. I think with the time that we've got remaining, I appreciate if any of you need to go. I think there's some slight confusion over whether we were finishing at 3:30 or 4, but we're certainly around till 4 o'clock. If anybody else has got any questions, obviously do speak up or pop them in the chat, or if anybody has any experiences to share in the States as well, because you know, the Export Shed is all about sharing ideas and with each other, as much as sort of us giving you information or sort of talking to experts. So do contribute at this stage if you would like to. While everybody's thinking about that, I wonder, Barbara and Amita, have you got any sort of cultural top tips that you might want to share about the US? I know we touched upon this a little bit earlier. Yeah, just anything else that maybe we haven't covered that you wanted to sort of chip in with?
For me, I suppose I've from personal experience, a few years ago when I was working in the States and I was doing some marketing for an agri-tourism business, and some of what I was doing was the social media as well, and I went in with my English head. I tried to be culturally aware, but I did go in with my English head, and I waffled and I used far too many words and I kept getting told off for using the wrong kind of language and just get to the point. So it was an interesting learning curve for me. I still haven't learned anything, clearly.
It's okay, you're in the UK now.
Yeah. But,
one of the things. Oh, sorry, Amita.
Oh, I was just going to, I think one experience that I share, before I started at DIT, I had an e-commerce company and here in the UK. And it was really, and this was when I first arrived to the UK. I don't know why, I was chasing the rain, I don't know, from California, but and I set up the company, and my business was selling, I had a flash sales site where I sold high-end children's wear brands. And so what it required was for me to convince high-end brands to give me some of their stock at a discount so I could sell it on, which was no easy thing. But what I really discovered is how, I went in and closed at the end of every conversation, because that's what Americans do. And the Brits here didn't really appreciate that. I needed to kind of back up and try to build some sort of rapport or relationships. I think that's number one, is I learned really in the opposite direction that I needed to like calm down and stop, trying to sign at the bottom of every line. It just doesn't work. And I think, another thing that I learned through that was that there should be probably more collaboration between UK companies. And I'm taking a Tech for Good cohort. I see a few of my colleagues that are going to come with me on that mission. So I'm taking a bunch of tech companies to the States. And I think in that cohort, there are some businesses that you could say are slight competitors, but I think the collaboration piece is really, really critical. In the States, competitors will collaborate with one another if it means that they're both going to get something out of it. And I think here in the UK, we have a very suspicious nature. We tend, and of course we're talking in generalisms, but we tend not to hang out with our competitors. And I think if you're entering a market such as the States, and you are two cheese producers in the Southwest, but you're both sort of artisan and maybe not, not huge, it might be worth having a conversation together to see how you could go to the market together. That's really an important point, because it really is the culture in the States. And the last thing I will say, and I'm probably giving Tom lots of business, but of course we have other attorney names, but when I had my e-commerce business, I was bootstrapping. I didn't have any money. I was, broke startup. First thing I did was hire a lawyer. And before I did anything, I made everyone sign an NDA. Some of my British friends looked at me as if I was insane. But that really proves the culture. We are preventative in the States, and if you don't have a good lawyer, an accountant, a trademark, and all of that sort of ammunition behind you before you go into the States, it will be very hard to be taken seriously. And I think that's really, really critical. Of course, don't start spending money before you've proven that you can make some money out of the States. But it just goes to show that sort of community you need behind you to enter the market.
Go on, Nigel.
I think one of the things I would say is really understand your competition. Really understand. One of the biggest things I find I get in my job is people say we haven't got any competition, which is quite frankly laughable, because everybody's got competition. I remember the music industry didn't think it had any competition until it sort of woke up one day and realized it had no money. And the music industry's competition was the video game industry, the gaming industry. That's where all the money was going. And it didn't cotton on to that, and it didn't suss that out until it was too late. Okay. Everyone's got competition. It just may not be directly in your particular, product line, but everyone has got competition. All right. So understanding that. And the other thing is understand your audience as well. Another common statement I get is everyone can buy my product. I hear it all the time. They can, but they're not going to. So understand your audience and understand your competition, and really nail those. And don't think you haven't got competition, because you've got a lot of it, and the States even more so.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, does anybody else have anything that they would like to ask for the last few minutes of the session? Any other comments, questions, experiences? Anybody want to share? No, probably. I feel like maybe it was sort of slightly off-putting, and sort of these dire warnings of how complicated it might be to do business in the States. But maybe Amita, as our resident American, can you give us something positive to finish on?
Yeah, I mean, we're all here, right? So I think that's positive. It's still, despite all of, it's a great market. And what I was going to say to Nigel's point with competition, the thing is, one thing that, and I noticed this also through my own e-commerce business, because I was trying to market to an American consumer. I learned a lot through that little business, and we like variety. So it's okay to have competition because we're a jaded bunch. And of course, I am talking more coastal. I'm from California. I'm not talking about the middle, but okay, won't get political. I'm not going to go to politics, but I think that's the point. It's a fast-moving. Please don't be put off. I think the point is that we're here to support you, even if there's 1,000 people doing the same thing as you. That's okay, because we like variety. If you've ever been to a Whole Foods store or any grocery store in the States, you will see that there are at least 15 types of whole wheat bread. So that's the point. You can all sort of survive, but you need that preparation behind you and the research behind you. And you need to have something unique about your business. And that merely could be that your product or your expertise is from the UK. That is very much appreciated. They might not know where Devon is or what it is, or they don't know where Bristol is, but Americans do appreciate a different UK-born product. They do like our innovation. They respect our tech expertise, despite the fact that we have Silicon Valley. So I think there are a lot of reasons to go. And I think the main point to illustrate that is that it remains, and it has held this title for a very long time, our #1 export partner. And and so a lot of people are doing business there. But you've got to be prepared. That's the moral of this story. But we're here to help you do that. So go for it.
And there's a question just popped up actually from Grantly. Do US companies sidestep overseas brands looking for US-based businesses? I think that's another thing we do hear a lot of. The Buy American sort of thing. Yeah, we hear that sentiment a lot. Is that a myth? I mean, you've just said that Americans do like British products. They respect our tech, etc. Yeah, and is it a benefit to have stock in the US market?
Yeah, I think, and Nigel will touch on this too, on the stock piece, but yes and no. So I think made in America is a thing, just like made in the UK is a thing. We naturally want to support our local business. That's not going to go away. So it very much depends on what you're doing, what your product is. If it's a Me Too product, you really have to find something unique to sell your product. If it's a tech or an innovation, it's going to come down to price. So, yes and no. It's really hard to answer that without digging into the sector. But I would say that, if it's a food product, it's easier. If it's a technology, no, it's not as easy, because it kind of comes down to price. But I would say that, going back to my other point, just keep thinking 15 types of whole wheat bread. The variety is there. So if there's a made in US product and there's a few others that are made in the UK, it's that variety, it's that short attention span and wanting to try different things. But it very much depends on the sector. Yeah.
One of the things I'm going to touch on that as well is, it's why I always talk about localization, because, and I say this over and over again. Translation is to be understood, but localization is to belong. So actually, if that is a concern about, appearing to be a US brand, then the more localized you are to that market, the easier it is to belong in that market. You've only got to look at our own shelves to look at the brands that belong in the UK. Like when you buy Nutella, you're buying an Italian brand. When you buy Heineken, you're buying I want to say Dutch. I think it's a Dutch beer. I might have got that wrong. I might be Danish. I always get the two. But anyway, but they are so embedded within our kind of consumer psyche. They don't feel like those brands. And yes, okay, you can say, well, Tyler have got a huge marketing budget, and you know, Heineken have got a huge marketing budget. Of course, Heineken is made in Slough. Someone's just posted in. Thanks, Grundy. Yeah, it's as brands themselves, you can actually appeal to a market by belonging there, by localizing to that culture as much as you possibly can. One client I actually used to work with, they've got a brand in the UK, and to appeal to the American market, they put London at the end of it. And they're not even from London, they're from Bournemouth. So, you know, so, but London holds sway. So actually, you know, creating that, the London brand, if they'd have put Truro where I live, no one in, or Bournemouth, no one in the States knows where that is. But London, people in America know where London is. You know, there was the old joke in the vacation industry, in holidays, is basically Americans, when they come, they go to London, they go to Edinburgh, they might go to Bath, and that's basically it. Anything outside of that, they're not interested because they don't know they exist. So, you know, you can appeal to that audience and localize to that audience in quite a subtle way, in quite a clever way, without saying, hey, we are Yankee Doodle Dandy.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. And from my experience, I've noticed that the attitudes will vary a bit from state to state as well, according to the, you know, well, demographics a little bit, really. Some are more open to non-US brands than others, in depending on what you're looking at, really. But yeah, I'm liking what Nigel's saying there too. Interesting.
Okay, I think we're pretty much out of time. So just want to finish by saying thank you to everybody for coming. It feels like there's probably a lot more to dive into, especially if we could get Tom back again to get a bit more free legal advice. I do encourage everybody to take advantage of his offer, because that sounds really good. I've just sort of tried to pick up on kind of 5 things that I've learned from this session. First one being plan and research, obviously. Be local in a cultural sense and in a geographical sense when you're doing business in the States. Get legal advice, possibly from Tom. Other lawyers are available. The same rules apply for e-commerce as when you're doing business through other routes. And the issues of visas and immigration is really complicated. So that's maybe something to explore. So yeah, that's probably about it for today. But yeah, thanks everybody for a great session, and thanks to all our experts, and a happy Christmas from everyone in the shed. We look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Merry Christmas. Almost.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everybody. I've got to do a Tom now and go off to another meeting. That makes me sound more important than I am. I'm not as important as Tom, but take care.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.